My name is Lauren Zayu, and we're back for the second season of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, the show about what you say and how you say it. We'll be chronicling the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration on everything from immigration to HBCUs. So join me for a crash course on this country's politics, current events, and how we move forward. Hello and welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. I'm your host, Lauren Zayu. I'm so excited for our show today. We're talking about the impact that COVID-19 is having on businesses, particularly Black-owned businesses. And we're talking about this with a very dear friend of mine. Today, we're talking to Nathan Jones. He's the founder of Morning Tea, a real estate development firm with the mission to invest in more vibrant communities. Previously, Nate has spent 4 years as a private equity associate investing in impact real estate assets in early stage mission-driven technology companies across the United States. He began his career as a community organizer and co-founder with Village Micro Fund, where he's now a board member. Village Micro Fund is a social enterprise with the mission to train and invest in minority business owners in Southwest Atlanta. During his tenure, he spearheaded small business training, lending, and market access programs in partnership with Invest Atlanta, Morehouse College, and local community stakeholders to increase access to opportunities. Village's work has been funded by the Annie E. Casey Foundation and the Atlanta Wealth Building Initiative. He has been featured in NPR, Huffington Post, and The Bitter Southerner. Nathan holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Morehouse College and a master's in business administration from the McComb School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. I'm excited to welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered my friend, Nathan Jones. Hello.
Hey.
How are you?
What's up? I'm good. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm glad you could be here. I know you're joining us from Texas where so much is happening right now. And so thank you for your time and energy with everything going on in the world.
Oh, absolutely. It's we're having some strange times in Texas right now, but I appreciate you for having me, and I'm looking forward, and I'm honored to be in conversation with you.
I'm glad to hear that. You want to just kind of let the people know like your background and how you came into this?
Yeah, background has been a little all over the place. I would say I've been kind of driven by one or two big goals, right? I think I find the most joy and, on the flip side, frustration in, experiences and opportunities to, try to reimagine what vibrant communities are. And, when I think about vibrant communities, I think of things that are equitable, where people, don't have, encumbrances to be able to, experience the full opportunity of life. And I have found a lot of those things are steeped in race, are steeped in, just inequities, historical, and, just place. One of my former bosses used to say that opportunity is, genius is equally distributed across zip code, but opportunity is not. And, that's one of the things that, has really driven my, professional pursuits. As a function of that, I've gone down a lot of different paths as, a founder and community organizer, been a farmhand, a DJ, and most recently, a private equity investor and in real estate and venture capital, and hopefully very soon a real estate developer, working on some projects in Dallas. So went to Morehouse, obviously dear old Morehouse, and then most recently finished my MBA at University of Texas in Austin last May. Graduated into the pandemic. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's really great to hear. And so as someone who has kind of been looking at business from what sounds like all sides, in the midst of a global pandemic, what should we be looking at? People are quoting stock market numbers, people are quoting joblessness rates and unemployment. Like, what is an overall, I guess, like good marker of how the economy is doing?
Yeah, that's tough, I think normally, but, especially now. We are just in a really strange position. So, you look at, unemployment rates, for example. I think our unemployment rate now is roughly like 7%, which, by itself doesn't mean much, but in context to, a year ago, today at the beginning of the pandemic, it was 14%. And a year before that, 3%. So, it's certainly, a strange time to think about what employment means with respect to, an economy, but also the amount of, jobs that are available, is a really strange kind of metric to look at as, our economy has become to kind of stratify. So you think about low income, middle income workers who are unskilled or low skilled. We are now in a place where the majority of those jobs have transitioned to technology or have moved overseas, as it's become easier for companies to source labor and talent all over the place. And then you think about the stock market. We have had record long lines around food banks across the country. We're in a time of, probably the highest civil unrest since, the civil rights movement. And, our stock market has record highs, outside of us, being in the global pandemic, so obviously stock market is probably not the best metric to understand, how the economy is doing. So, normally, in any other environment, we would look at unemployment, joblessness, GDP, the sum of all the goods and services sold in the US, with respect to years prior and years forward, as, a measure of what the economy is doing. But inequality, wealth inequality, and just stratification has made that very difficult, because if you, for example, came into like $1 million last year, and you just put it in the stock market, you would have made $170,000 just having money, right? So if you look at the S&P returned 17% last year. So if you look at, if you approach that question as someone who has a 401k or if someone who has assets, you would say the economy is doing great. But, on the flip side of that, if you, are a low income worker and you log onto your New York Times like app, or, you turn on the TV and you look at, CNN or Fox News or whatever, and, they say the economy is, on fire, that sounds like a little bit of a slap in the face to you. So, in my own opinion, I would say not well. The economy's, we've just stratified ourselves to a point where all of the workers who, fuel the economy are segregated away from all the opportunity that, the stock market provides, that, new jobs, new technology, new innovation provides. So it's going well for the people with assets, but the people without assets, there almost needs to be a completely different index for those people's health, because it's not good and it's not representative.
I think that's a really good frame, because I think that a lot of people, have a hard time figuring out which one of those they are. I think a lot of people have felt very much back and forth about that. We've seen, or at least I've seen, like friends of mine who have kind of come into playing with this stock thing a little bit, but not really knowing what they're doing, and overwhelmingly kind of being like the first generation in their family to do that. And so how does that end up working out? And so I think acknowledging that the economy looks different for people with assets than it does for people who are overwhelmingly don't have assets or have more liabilities makes a lot of sense. And kind of transitioning into hold up, as we think about this inequity that plagues so much of our economy. And we know that often unemployment in the Black community is double that of the majority. And so I'm thinking, like, numbers tell one story, and like, I think we're raised to believe that numbers are inherently objective, but we know that they're not. And so what does it look like for particularly people in marginalized communities right now, who are so many of these people labeled low skill workers, and more importantly, low wage workers?
Yeah, not good. I mean, I genuinely, like, I am always just in awe by like the amount of joy and happiness and warmth that Black people, people of color in general, but especially Black people, are able to produce on the daily because it's just it's stark out here. As I was mentioning earlier, if you with respect to, for example, a real estate project, right? Like if you look at a community that you wanted to invest in, you would look at types of things like job growth and median income, and you know as measures to understand, can people afford rents here? Can people afford to pay for trinkets here, for groceries here? All of these metrics around income and job growth and things like that are a function of value to people who are investors and to people who are policymakers and leaders at the city. If you think about the time in between, call it the 1940s and 1970s, as we were coming out of World War II, and America was kind of in its golden age. You had new factories that were opening, and Detroit is a great example, right? You had companies that were locating in areas where they could find low wage workers. And, as a function of that, on this kind of stepping, laddering function of capitalism, some people got a job. Some people, became managers. Some people, did well for themselves. And, uh, yeah, what's interesting is you think about like this theory of like trickle down economics. Like that's something that worked in that period between 1940 and 1970. Where before then we were in a primarily agrarian economy. America was was rural and was poor, and like this idea of capitalism really brought the country out of poverty, brought it into its golden age. And that is not happening anymore, right? I mean, like we, as our economy has evolved, and we have shifted from an economy that makes things to an economy that just spends. Our economy is maybe 70% just consumerism now. We're now not in a place where jobs are locating in neighborhoods of color, in neighborhoods that have low skill, low wage, opportunities. So if you look at like, so if you don't have like a very popular, if you don't have a very popular Congress, person, if you don't have a popular mayor, if you don't have, a college president that, has a poppin' Twitter handle or whatever, where, they can inspire different companies to go and start new types of programs and all of these types of things, and which is called that the Bronx, AOC. You've got, I forget, the mayor of Stockton. I mean, Atlanta, for example, on fire. Some parts of Detroit where you have, Kellogg Foundation, a number of, philanthropic presences. The majority of the nation, is not like that. So, to your question earlier, things are not well, and I don't know if we have a path forward to solve those issues. And like on top of that, I mean, you think about like PPP loans, for example, right? And the amount of like small businesses, Black businesses in particular, that have gone out of business. There's, I don't know if this will be the case, and knock on wood, it's not, but it is looking like this COVID-19 pandemic will be one of the largest wealth stripping events in, Black America and America in general. Like everyone has been, hurt by this, but Black Americans, more than anyone else. It's not in a great place.
No, and I think that's really important. And I'm so glad that you brought up the PPP loans and these other ways that the government is attempting to salvage this, right? Because so much of what was laid out, even in the 40s or the 70s, was still like rooted in some policy in some spaces, right? So I'm thinking about this past year, 2020, I did work on the census. And so a lot of those factories moving places, right, was looking at census data, seeing what areas were growing, and then like almost like they brought the jobs to the areas that were growing in a very like chicken and egg type situation, right? And then I'm thinking about, who was it, maybe 3 years ago now, when Amazon announced that it was, having a new headquarters, and there was like a bidding war across the country of like, it was like the complete inverse, where cities were like, come here, come here, come here, we'll lower, state legislatures were stripping taxes, everybody was like trying to vie for this company to come in an effort to be revitalized. And so just to see that shift in roughly, let's say 50 years, which isn't, which sounds like a lot of time when you think about a lifetime, but over like the lifetime of an economy or a country actually is a fairly short period of time. We've had a complete shift in the way that we interact with corporations as employees. And so I thought about that when you're coming. I was like, yeah, that is definitely a shift that's happened. And even now with the PPP loans, here in DC at least, it feels like so many of the businesses that have closed over COVID have been the Black-owned businesses, the Black-owned bars, restaurants, clubs, and things like that. And so I'm trying to figure out, like, is the situation that these loans are being distributed equally, or is there an issue with the loan process? Is it that, maybe Black businesses traditionally have a little less disposable income anyway, and so it kind of ends up being like you're already on the bottom, and so you take the first hit? Like, in your looking at the data, what does it appear to be the issue there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of issues there. I mean, I love your point about like how like labor and companies have grown over the past 50 years, back to that, early 30s, 40s period, that was the first time when, the Rockefellers and the Carnegies, all those people were coming. And like these people were employing 10-year-olds in their factories, right? I mean, I think one of the beautiful things about our democracy, at least historically, has been that we have gotten the chance to have it be reactive to each other, right? We get to choose the society that we want to live in and the rules that we, govern ourselves by. At least we used to, back in the day, right? And, you try things break, things work, and you take the next step forward, right? And I think labor laws as a function of, your comment earlier are a great example of that. And hopefully, all this civil unrest will have some type of, equal and opposite positive reaction on how Black people are able to move through the economy. But yeah, I mean, to your point, I mean, on the PPP thing, Black businesses are just undercapitalized across the country. And that is, historically a function of just wealth creation and the availability of wealth to Black people. And, there are two things I think to call out there. One, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but, similarly coming out of this like World War II period when you had all these, just mass unemployment that was coming from, all these, soldiers from the war coming back into the U.S. And, obviously the federal government, sponsored all these housing programs and, how, you were able to get very cheap, mortgages to purchase homes, and wealth gets created and compounded over the course of, the next 80 years, 80, 90 years up until where we are today. And, if you look at, the average white family, I think has $117,000 of wealth, and the average Black family has, I don't know, maybe $8,000, something like that, right? At least 10x, 10x less than what that is, right? So if you're thinking about, starting a business, I mean, you think about it from the same way, you gotta You got to have some employees. You got to be able to pay rent. You got to be able to, I mean, you need a few $100,000 to be able to get going, outside of, hopefully having some type of relationship with the bank. And if the average Black person has $8,000 in net worth, on average, we're going to be having undercapitalized businesses. And one of the first businesses that we invested in with Village was this business called the Westview Pizza Cafe in Westview, Atlanta. As an entrepreneur named Keitra, who has gone on to do some really great things now, but she funded her business with her husband's severance package, and that was like $60,000 or something like that. And they didn't have access to a bank, which is why we gave them a loan, right? Like a micro loan, which was something very small. And, in the grand scheme of how she could have participated in the economy had she been fully capitalized, was a drop in the bucket. But, there's one issue of just not having access to networks of people who have capital. There is also this, second factor of capital markets, people with money, viewing your business, your neighborhood, your customer profile, your product as less valuable or more risky, which could be a function of them not understanding the market, which oftentimes they don't, not caring about, your business, which, oftentimes people don't care to do. And, that has been like calcified into financial theory, right? I mean, to the point where if you think about risk and, and comps, right? Like, I will give you $100,000 because there is another business that looks just like you that, also got $100,000. So really all I'm doing is saying this looks cool, but I don't know much about it. But I can look at this project that's already started and has some growth and some hair to it. And I can look at that and say, oh, these things look very similar. I'll give you $100,000 with the hope that you end up looking like that one day. And then lastly, which is a function, I think, of all of those things with respect to PPP is just underbanked neighborhoods, right? So the PPP, and I'm no PPP scholar, but 47% of the volume of those loans had to go through a bank. The federal government, Congress signs the CARES Act and they say whatever $100 billion is available. They are not a bank, right? So really all they're doing is, I think, have not looked at this, I would imagine so, insuring the loans that a bank makes. So I think it was PayPal, Bank of America, JP Morgan, PNC, all of these banks, less PayPal, FinTech, but all of these banks that, are not in low income neighborhoods, are not in Black neighborhoods, high income Black neighborhoods, or low income Black neighborhoods, because of some of those same risk factors. And just double clicking into their like methodology, if, let's say it cost them $500,000 a year to, operate their, storefront space in rent and salaries and, all these different things. If they don't make loans in those neighborhoods or in their geographic area because of whatever reason, then, they don't have any revenue. So that becomes a cost center for the bank. And, they can rationalize closing this space when it's really a decision that's steeped in race more than it is, opportunity, or, because all those neighborhoods, they have people, they have incomes, they have salaries. And the data would show that Black people on average will extend their budget, 1.5, 2 times more than they should, to purchase things. And, it's just a function of, do you, the bank, have a incentive to lend there, to invest there? And I think what's fascinating about where we are today in this, greener social, climate, is that social impact has become a function of brand more than it has, a financial, you know, center, right? So Coca-Cola, for example, their chief impact officer was formerly their chief brand officer. Uh, DoorDash, for example, they made a $1 million donation to some organization, and they spent $6 million on marketing to talk about that $1 million donation. We're now in a place where um, impact and brand, and as a function of brand, consumerism, revenue, are in alignment. So, you could look all across the globe to look at this. I mean, like Nike's entire brand campaign is like black as hell, and it's all over the place. And we'll just have to see if that trickles into financial services, and moreover, if that's something that actually transfers into opportunity, wealth creation for Black people, and not just as an ad, a temporary ad.
That is so interesting to hear it framed like that. Like, I really enjoy that depiction of it, because what I'm hearing is like an investment, like a desire to have Black dollars spent, but like not to invest in Black people to create wealth, right? So it's like, we want you to come here and like us and maybe even like have a good experience. But when the time comes for you to make your own money, we don't necessarily want that. And we will like systemically keep that from happening, all the while doing this like dog and pony show with the branding in an effort to like appear inclusive, because that's the hot thing to be. I hadn't thought about the way that must look in banking. And so I want actually to spend a little more time talking about, you said Black communities are often underbanked. And so is that like not enough banks in the area? Is that like, what does that look like? And I guess, how would you know if your area was underbanked?
The quick way is, if you don't, I'm sure there's some type of metric of like, if you don't have a bank in like, 3 miles or whatever, then you're underbanked. I'm sure no different than like being in a food desert. Yeah, exactly. To that point, WFAA, the news station in Dallas, did this underbanked series, like maybe a year and a half ago or so, and they found that I-30, which is kind of the bisecting line between South Dallas and North Dallas, there were 53 bank branches on the south side of I-30, primarily Hispanic, Black folks, and there were 53 bank branches in one square block of the neighborhood, and where North Park Mall is in Highland Park, on top of, I don't know, something like 500 something bank branches that were north of the city. But which if you overlay that on top of these maps that the Fed made when they were rolling out these mortgage programs post World War II, it's very interesting and shocking and a little scary to kind of look at how those trends have persisted, over the decades. But really what that means to be underbanked, it's just a lack of access to capital, and our economy is evolving, right? 20 years ago, if you were in an unbanked neighborhood, that would just mean you just don't have access to capital.
Right.
So, I think one of the interesting parts about how economies grow and evolve is, now we have, Cash App and Venmo and Lending Club and all of these, mobile apps and innovations to help you get access to capital. Not that many of those things are any more or less, equitable than the current system. Nonetheless, you can see it a little better. But 10 years ago, if you didn't have a bank in your neighborhood, that just means y'all ain't gonna have nothing new. And it's interesting, also, with respect to how like investors and like the investing function has evolved over time. From that period, I've been obviously doing some homework and some studying on this like post World War II period, but then things like venture capital and private equity, all those things were not very those just didn't exist, right? Like investment banking was something that was very new, like the ability for you to purchase another person's business, the need for you to need to have some type of advice about how to make your business more efficient. Like all those things were very new in the 30s through the 70s. And then, Reagan era, you start to have things like private equity and leverage buyouts and like the ability to purchase businesses all debt, and that really changed the way that the American economy started to work. And then now as you move into late 70s up till today, you have things like venture capital and all these different types of innovations of how capital can flow to people and flow to the highest opportunity, which is, if you think about what the GDP would have been back then, the sum of all the goods and services sold versus today, you can imagine that those are astronomically different numbers. So there's just so much more money that's in the economy that needs to be spent. And you see those things, in real estate and, commercial real estate transactions and brand new, shiny, big, boxes, big glass boxes. Washington, D.C. is a spectacular example of a city that is completely transformed as a function of commercial real estate, which, is nice and does look good sometimes, when you discount gentrification from that. But more than anything is, a function of an ability, a want and an ability to shelter your wealth in a building, right? And that has completely transformed, urban landscapes, but, capital markets in general. Yeah.
No, I think that's really good because I think that part of what we're looking at here is like access being the pinpoint of or the origin point for like how the rest of it ends up. And so as we transition into something I wanted to talk about with you in particular is the way that you have intentionally acted in some spaces. You mentioned Village earlier, and so I want to kind of like using that as the prototype, expounding on what that is and sort of how you're doing that with Morning Tea too, if anything, just to like offer alternatives of what access can look like.
Yeah. Village, my baby, Village kind of does three things. It's grown kind of into a social impact fund, but we train entrepreneurs primarily in Southwest Atlanta through kind of a biannual cohort. People come into a class, 2 times a week, learn from each other, learn these kind of basic business skills. We invest in some entrepreneurs via lending and debt and equity-based crowdfunding, which I'll touch back on, and then access to markets. So really, I think the 2 most important things there are, I think the magic, the secret sauce, if you will, is the culture that's created. I think in general, entrepreneurship is lonely, but like more than that, is seemingly competitive. And like the kind of founding thought was that like in Black neighborhoods, it doesn't have to be that competitive, right? In fact, if the bike shop would work with the restaurant to deliver food to the neighborhood, there is so much value that's unlocked by through collaboration. And, that's one of the things that we really kind of focus on, for Village. And, on the back end of that, this like access to markets has been one of the most difficult things to do that we are working through every day and trying to figure out ways to make that make more sense, but are very methodical about trying to have opportunities for our entrepreneurs to pitch at churches, at neighborhood gatherings, at farmers markets, at whatever it may be, because similarly the thought is that everybody in Black neighborhoods is kind of one or two circles of separation away from each other. And if you could find that one, super customer that puts you on Facebook and they say, hey, we love whoever's, whatever's Planters Peanuts. And I'll use a real one. There's a guy, he's actually a Morehouse grad. He has a business called D's Nuts, which is super funny. There are some very good nuts though. And it's like, oh, I love D's Nuts. And that's actually very funny to say. But, there's this kind of networking effect that, begins to happen. And, we think that accelerates sales and all these different things. And one of the core functions of that is just debt and equity-based crowdfunding. So entrepreneurs realize that they have a capital gap that they need and call that, $7,000 in a loan for a new oven, or, a new honeybee stand, or, to pay for, to get your in Lewis's case, nuts into a packaging that looks like it should be in Target or something, right? Like there are these small capital gaps that exist because entrepreneurs are working on micro things that is not able to be met because people don't have wealth, don't have enough cash to just say, oh yeah. But, on a micro level, they might have $50, $100 to say, okay, cool. Like I'm definitely down to do this. And I love your product and I go to your store all the time anyways. I would love to de-risk my investment, my $100, by shopping at your store as often as I already do. And then, on the flip side of that, you're able to get $107, in a year or 2 years or something like that. And that's really what, Village is all about. And then, on the morning tea side, on, how we think about raising and deploying capital in real estate projects that are different is very interesting. I mean, like we are in the very early phases of this, but the general thought is that the cash flows that come from a real estate development, apartment rents, right? Someone is paying, to live in this space, or someone is taking up a lease, in this space. Those things are financed with debt. So you have revenue, your rents, minus whatever you have to pay for your debt. And then you might sell the building, and then someone makes a lot of money. My thought on this is that buildings and in general, our built environment has, so much impact on the way that we move through our neighborhoods, through the way we move through our communities. And, community members are really the people that create value for, these real estate entrepreneurs. If you person that lives in X neighborhood do not shop at that business is not able to pay rent. If you don't live, take a lease, or to want to rent in some apartment building, that building goes under. I mean, a great example of this is the 1 trillion landlords now that are acting unsavourly right now because people are not able to pay their rents. And they're trying to figure out, okay, well, who's on the hook for this? Like, can I kick these people out of my building because, because they're not paying their rent? Or, is the bank going to give me some type of, reprieve because, my tenants aren't paying me, right? The whole thought there, right, is that like communities should be on the cap table. Like they should own a portion of the building. And when the community is in alignment with the owner, then value is created for everyone. So, the big dream is like, what would it look like for the Union Market in DC or Ponce City Market in Atlanta to be owned, 30% by the community, right? Like how much capital, how much wealth could be created by, neighborhoods that have historically been African American. That's the big thought. I mean, on top of, all the other, positive things that happen when neighborhoods are lively and activated, and interactions are able to be made inside of buildings, right? The main thing is that it's a wealth creation opportunity for communities, which to our point earlier, if the assumption is that companies will not move back to these places to hire people, and these people will be relegated to low wage, on the margins work, like where does stimulus come from? And I think this could be, a great solution to that. So that's kind of the world of like impact and all those things. I think is just extremely fascinating and much needed right now.
Definitely on the much needed and fascinating piece as well. And I guess as a question that I have is that so much, particularly in our circles, right, is about capitalism being this evil that like cannot be overcome, cannot be negotiated with, must be dismantled, must be taken down. And so what I feel like I hear you offering is like maybe an echoing of that in the ideological space, but like here are some practical things we can do in the interim to try and make it more livable, or like more accurately, in an effort to try to distribute some of the power that comes with that. Because that's the real issue, the power inequity that appears to show up in capitalism.
Yeah, spot on. I mean, it's, similarly, like if you look at like the global political economy, like the UK, has, a labor party, right? A socialist party, right? I mean, like India, I don't know, 3 or 4 billion people that live there, right? Was once under, a monarchy, right? Which was trying to fill the needs of all 3 billion of these people across, what is probably 4 times the size of America, right? I mean, like countries naturally come to a point where the power structure is off, and people on the margins, I think about folks that storm the Capitol, right? I think about low-income Black folks. There are the way that our country is creating, producing, and pushing out resources is not working for a large amount of our country. And it is a natural flow, from what I understand, of how the world works. And people experiment with different ways to govern themselves all the time. I think this conversation that we're having in the US now about democratic socialism, hardcore socialism, capitalism, like all the different like little variations of green capitalism is fascinating, and I think it's much needed. And business models are starting to come out every day. I mean, there is a organization in Cincinnati called Cleveland, called the Evergreen Cooperative, and basically it's a worker-owned cooperative. They have 250 employees that live in, I think it's called University Circle is the neighborhood, and they have 3 or 4 large, $1 million plus contracts to wash it's a commercial laundry business, and they have a contract with the main hospital system to basically wash all the clothes. So the hospital system obviously has $1 million worth of clothes that needs to be washed every year. That revenue comes into this business, minus expenses, call it $300,000 a year that's left in profits, that it gets to be distributed equally amongst these 200 worker owners. And that, I think, is a direct form of protest to our current capitalist environment. But everyone who is on the anti-capitalism front, it's a system that only works for people with assets, right? We could talk for quite a while about that and the ups and downs of it. But the point is, it is seemingly reaching a breaking point, and that's showing up in our political unrest. It's showing up in this massive wealth inequality. It's showing up in this stark difference between unemployment and hunger and the stock market. It's showing up in segregated neighborhoods. It's real. It's not just on Twitter.
That's very true, and I'm glad to hear you kind of wrestling with all of the things that come with that. And so that is good to keep in mind, kind of like as we transition into Drunken Love, or our final segment. I want to take a second to kind of like wrestle with some of the things that you've laid out here. So one, I learned a lot just listening to you kind of break down the history and the current and how all of it came together. And so thank you immensely for that. But also keeping in mind that so much of what we're wrestling with is that as a society, we don't actually know what's on the other side of this. So there's a lot of, it's this or it's that, or, it's XYZ. We don't know what's on the other side of it because America as a superpower has had a particular construct, and assuming we abandon said construct, we are operating in a completely new zone. And so I think it's important to remember that we're going to need all ideas at the table. It's not going to be a situation where one thing is the key that unlocks everything to being what we need, with the exception of eradicating white supremacy.
Right.
but no, really, we're going to need all ideas at the table from an economic perspective to kind of piece together what we want it to look like. And I think power building and equity have to take center stage there. And so figuring out what that looks like on various levels is going to be very, very important for this next round. But with that in mind, Mr. Jones, is there anything you would like to close us out with?
Oh, I don't know. I'm happy to be alive. I'm happy to be healthy. And, I don't know. I'm praying for everyone, this is, outside of us being in, this crazy time, right now, right? No power in Texas, civil unrest. I think about all in a pandemic, I think about all the folks who were in, Texas, we were at capacity on hospital beds in Texas. Mm-hmm. And, the majority of our state has not had power for the last, 3 or 4 days, right? Outside of the reality that we are in right now, I'm hoping that everyone comes out of the pandemic. We've been inside, by ourselves, for the most part for the last 12 years. And I'm just hoping that people are okay on the other side of this. I'm hoping that the time that we have spent, in reflection and in observation of how the world has changed or is changing in front of us will inspire people to, have some courage and say something and build communities and find confidence in like scenarios. Mm-hmm. I really do think that so much of what we're facing is stuff that everyone agrees on, but because we are so geographically and assumingly ideologically spread apart from each other, people aren't listening to each other. Right. And I really hope that on the other side of this, people realize that we get to pick how we want to live. And, it starts with a conversation, and, conversations can grow into movements. And, to your point earlier, we don't know what's on the other side of this. I think we know how we feel today. And, all we can do is take the first step and just see where it goes. Just the world has changed. We cannot operate, economically, as if we are still, the front runner, the metric leader in all things, like we were in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, minus racial equality. That has changed. China, Korea, Brazil. These are emerging, economic centers that are overtaking like the U.S. Right? And that's the reality that we have to deal with for the next 30 years, right? We're just gonna be on for a wild ride. So, I'm praying for everybody Black for sure, and hope we get out here.
I think that's definitely the way to wrap it. Nate, I've enjoyed you so much today. Thank you so much for coming on. In the event that someone wants to reach out to you to ask any questions or to see more about your work, what's the best way they do that?
Oh, okay. Let's see. Instagram is good and Twitter is good. I think Instagram it's Nate and then 4 I's. And then Twitter is the 4th Scholar, the 4TH Scholar, which is something that our dear classmate made that Twitter handle for me in 2010.
Shout out to you having your same Twitter handle from 2010. Right. I'm not even going to say what my Twitter handle in 2010 was. Shout out to you for having one that was able to be continuous.
Yeah, that's great.
You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. If you're looking for me, you can find me at @LaurenZayu on Twitter and Instagram. And if you're looking for the show, you can find us at Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you so much for being with us, and I hope you enjoyed. You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered with host Lauren Zayu and music by Lighthouse Productions. If you want to learn more about the show, follow @LaurenZayu on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find more episodes on Facebook and Instagram at Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. Thanks for listening.